Welcome back, everybody. It's Saturday night. You're listening to America Now. I'm Barb Adams. Thanks so much for joining me. Well, I've got an interesting lineup for you tonight, so I hope you stay for the entire show. But if you do miss any part, you can listen in any time to this or any of my shows in their entirety on my website, radioamericanow.com, under Archives. Well, I don't know about you, but every time I venture out or turn on the TV or go online, there's growing evidence that people everywhere are acting crazier and crazier. From our so-called leaders down to individual citizens, random acts of bizarre behavior are becoming commonplace. For me, it begs the question, is America going crazy? Joining me now to discuss this topic is author and former statewide prosecutor and Deputy Attorney General of New Jersey, John J. Higgins. Together we form the Nonpartisan Practical Solutions for America, and we ask you join us here on air every week and on our new Facebook page to work together to find common ground in discussing and solving the challenges in America. If you'd like to join tonight's discussion, give us a call, 800-259-5791. Again, that's 800-259-5791. John, how you doing?
Good, Barb, and you?
I'm doing very well. No complaints here other than the crazies. The weather's even crazy. We're in the 80s. You know, everything's bloomed out. It's March.
Well, you're lucky. We've been at the other end of that mix this year. We seem to be having the Siberian winter, which is finally ending, I think. I think it was another snowstorm hitting up north of where we are, up in the Maine area or whatever, Massachusetts. So this winter just certainly doesn't want to let go.
Yeah, well, no offense, but I'm glad it's kind of been on the East Coast, and we've been warm and dry out here in the West. Well, John, every day I continue to see and hear examples of what can only be termed craziness going on. Just a couple of days ago, here in Colorado, in response to a tragedy that made national news, there was a woman who was attacked. Her unborn child was ripped out of her womb. One of our state representatives actually got up the other day and condoned that act, saying it was a curse of God upon America for our sin of not protecting innocent children in the womb, that our pregnant innocent children, need to be saved, and that pregnant women here in America shall be ripped open. He claimed he was quoting from the Bible. I mean, what the heck, How dare him condemn this victim? I mean, that's just insult on top of injury. Fortunately, the pregnant woman survived. The baby did not, and they did get the perp. But this guy's rabid crazy. What are your thoughts about all this stuff?
Well, I think that's where part of the problem comes with all the violence in society itself, is that the politicians have become so, so nasty and mean-spirited that they find some bizarre kind of terrible event, and they try to take it and twist it into something for their own agenda. And that's been going on across the country, more so in the last 10 years than any time I ever remember.
Yeah, it just seems like, especially since the Great Recession, when that hit, it kind of exacerbated everything, because then people really started getting more fearful. And, when people are fearful, they tend to look to other things outside of themselves to try to save them. And I think the logical one has been, the fundamentalists have been bringing the religion back for people to run to.
Well, I think you and I have discussed this before. It's that I often wonder what Bible they read from. From what I understand, the Bible is supposed to teach us peace and love and kindness towards one another and healing, not the exact opposite of creating rifts among, different groups in society, blaming the victims for various things, and making people more fearful than less. But if you want to try to gain control over the population, eventually what you want to do is you want to keep them so fearful that they're focused on whatever those, items are that you throw in front of them, so they don't look at what the real big picture is for themselves.
Yeah, I think that's really what it is. And I think, and it's not just here in America. Obviously, it's going on globally right now as well, but we're kind of concentrating here on the States. But, I think sometimes, too, with the state of fear, whether or not there is this agenda, and I do believe there is, to kind of keep us in this state of chaos, I think people just, by psychological state, when they're in a fearful state, they're easily thrown into chaos. And I think they transition pretty quickly from the psychological state of simplicity where everything's going okay to wildness, anarchy.
Oh, absolutely. And if you think of if there's anything that ever sparks revolution, it's always been, bad economic times with a lot of fear, and then some group or person, a cult of personality type, who comes in with some kind of solution that they start following those people because they're promising them something else. Hitler is one of the best examples of that. He took Germany, which was filled with fear, their economy was down in the tubes, and then had them, look for scapegoats. They made the Jews the scapegoats. Well, it wasn't only the Jews, it was the gypsies, it was, the mentally disabled and all of this other kind of thing. And then so that they're really all the cause of problems in society. And if you keep people focused on other people as being the problem, and you don't look at the person who's telling you that's what the problem is, then you miss the entire thing, and the next thing you know, the government's taken over.
Yep, and that's, I hate to say it, but that's what I see happening here in America. They're pointing out the liberals, the gays, the women. We're all the problems.
Well, and the thing that's becoming more and more offensive to me is that as soon as you start talking about trying to make things better for the general population in the country, not balancing the damn budget, but trying to make things better for the people, that live here and pay for everything, you're either a socialist or a communist or something in that kind of breed, because those are terrible, terrible words to use in our country. But at the end of the day, at some point, we need leaders who are trying to help us get along and get out of the bad messes we're in and not continue them or make them worse.
Do you think this is just a cycle that we're going through, though, John? I mean, this country's kind of gone through this, obviously, before. If I remember my history right, the McCarthyism era, which was, 50s or 60s or something like that?
50s, yes.
Yeah, okay. It seems like we're kind of repeating all this again.
Well, I think we do. It is somewhat cyclical, but the thing of it is today, I'm not so sure, because it's like on steroids because of the internet and the 24-hour news cycle and all of that. We're exposed to this information more and more. Generations past, it was like nobody was really watching McCarthy hearings. They were working or whatever. They had, 3 channels on TV. Today, any of those kinds of things, it can draw your attention and keep it going over and over and over again. And I think over the last 5 years or something, I would have thought by now, the 2008 recession would have really been, out of the mix, and we'd be back on a positive side. But they're telling us that, but I don't see that in reality.
Yeah, and I think most Americans in the middle class and lower classes are definitely not seeing that either, John. We're still in the situation where, yes, you can get jobs, but they're the lower end minimum wage. If you can get full time, you're not probably going to get benefits. There's still a lot to be fearful about. All right, America Now continues with more about Has America Gone Crazy after the break. All right, welcome back, everybody. You're listening to America Now, and might not be a bad time to be on Venus right now, because I'll tell you, between the wall Martians, the road rage, the bizarre crimes and acts of violence, and even the group of Republican leaders sending that wacky, treasonous letter to Iran, there is no shortage of weird behavior going on in this country right now. John, you mentioned the media before. Do you think the media is actually part of the agenda, promoting this agenda that's trying to keep us in chaos and fear, or is it that the media is just reflecting what's going on in the collective conscious with all of us? They've gone nuts too.
Well, I think part of the problem has become it's like a feeding frenzy for the media itself. If you think that there's only so many, channels you can look at and shows you can watch and stories you can see, the media is going to have a tendency to go to the ones that have people glued to the TV so that their advertisers are happy. So they're looking for those kinds of stories, and the stories that will do that aren't the do-good stories about, the Boy Scout who helps the little old lady across the street. It's about, rape, murder and mayhem. And so they constantly, I don't know if you have the same kind of weather stuff that where you are, but, we'll have a storm of the century, which of course was the first storm on January 2nd of 2000. And from that point on, it's like these big, gigantic things that were, 20 years ago, we just thought we were a normal storm. Now they have names and everything else. Yeah. So you've got to be glued that, the disaster is coming.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you. Everything. It's interesting how quickly we're going through the centuries, isn't it? Because it does seem like, we've had a couple of big, huge fires and floods and all this, and every time they say, it's, the flood of the century or flood of last 100 years and then 500 years, and we're up to 1,000 years. We've got to keep adding on. But each one is much more severe, as you say, and it's all sensationalism.
Hey, well, see, they got used to it in the 1990s because when they could say a storm of the century, it meant something. In 2001, it didn't mean so much. We just went through this with the one snowstorm they had coming through here, that it was going to be the worst snowstorm we've had since 1886, when all these people died and all of that kind of thing, where there was 5 feet of snow. But I remember when I was a kid in the 1960s, I think we had like 4 feet of snow the one time. Society didn't stop and end.
No, and you didn't die. You're still
right.
here. Really, truly. And it's really kind of putting us in a psychological state, not only of fear, but none of us can cope with anything. Look to Big Brother. They'll watch over for us. They're out there watching these storms for us. They're watching all these potential disasters for us. So stay tuned, because you can't possibly be prepared and ready for this. They'll tell you how to be.
Right, and the more sinister thing is when you have things like the Patriot Act that gets put into place, after 9/11 and the fear of the terrorists, we get to this point where, civil liberties start getting curtailed, or potentially all this information gets gathered that puts it into a pool that, people on the private side or the public side at some point can access that and use that in, terrible ways.
Yeah, any way they want to use it. We've talked about this before. That really is terrifying to think about, because they can sell this, they can use it, they can interpret it any way they want. They can take anything anyone says or writes and use it to whatever advantage they want. We don't have that advantage.
Right. Well, each one of us only has our own little voice, and the thing of it is that most people can't keep up with all the information is there. And eventually what happens is I think that people have a tendency to believe, one person or another that's, more public, and then they start, parroting what that person says because they believe that person has their best interest at heart. But that's not necessarily true. I think a good portion of this Tea Party movement that's happened, I've said this before, is really, it's a rich man's agenda being played out by people who don't have anything.
Yeah, exactly. Again, it seems like we've got everything at the extremes. We need to come back to balance in the middle ground somehow, some way, because working from the extremes on one side or the other is going to keep us divided. It's going to keep us working against one another and keep us in a state of fear. And, again, I go back with the Great Recession. I think a lot of people really became very aware of what was going on when you're talking about the rich, because the government basically chose to bail out the perpetrators rather than protect the victims. And we've been in a downward spiral since.
Right. And if anything, that whole cycle has accelerated. which is the bizarrest outcome in it, and that's the thing that probably does make me nervous, is that generally there's a self-adjustment that occurs, but there has been no self-adjustment. The criminals who perpetrated that recession, and I don't know how you don't consider them criminals, it's fraud on one level or another, not only have they skated, we've rewarded them with billions of dollars.
Yeah, and what's that send? What message does it send to the rest of us? Again, it's like with these big disasters and everything. We're not worthy. You're not. We're the little people out here. We can't possibly think for ourselves or do things right. So, we need these people at the top. They're the ones that need to be bailed out because they're the ones running things.
Right, and they're running everything into the ground. I mean, the real lesson for it is that if you're going to commit a crime, don't rob the Wawa. Become a banker.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Go big. White-collar crime. You can get away with it. I suppose it's always sort of been that way, but right now, it's just so obvious and in everybody's face.
Right, but they have everybody who doesn't have anything blaming the other person who doesn't have anything. Nobody's focused. I can't believe the Department of Justice on the federal level really hasn't gone after anyone. I mean, what's it, 7 years later now? I mean, what are they, asleep at the switch?
I'm afraid they're not asleep at the switch. We've talked about this before. Most of these people are in the pockets of somebody else. We've got a few at the top running the show, and the rest of the people are their puppets.
Well, it certainly seems that way, and all I know is that, as citizens, we really need to stay focused on what's the important stuff in society, and I really believe that we've got to start helping one another, and when you hear somebody trying to blame, the poor and the uneducated and all of that, they are not the problem. The problem is what's going on at the top.
Yeah, the problem is we're not communicating effectively anymore between one another. And we need to get it back to neighbor to neighbor and, friend to friend. Get us back communicating. All right, America Now continues after the break. Stay with us. All right, everybody, welcome back. We're discussing the interesting behaviors going on in America these days, from the top on down to the individuals. There's a lot to talk about. And John, I was talking about communication. It's also, we seem to be losing our sense of right and wrong. And where's the sense of dignity and respect for people, for one another?
Well, I think it's that we've become, a society that in some levels, worships the people who get more and more money, and money has become more of a god than it does for, just a matter of living. The extremes of the wealth that have been coming. I mean, who would have ever thought in our lifetime that we would have seen anybody who became a billionaire? Mm-hmm. When I was growing up, a millionaire seemed far away. There were very, very few of them. Now, everything has moved up 1,000-fold.
Yeah, everything except for the people at the bottom, which is, with the corporate welfare. I thought that statistic I researched was very interesting, that the bottom fifth of households in all but one state pay a larger share of their income in state and local taxes than the top 1% of earners. Corporate welfare effectively is redistributing from the poor to the rich. That's really interesting.
Right. Well, that was kind of that whole thing about trickle-down economics. There's some myth that if you pump money up at the top, that it will trickle itself down. Well, it's not trickling itself down. What made the country, strong and great was after World War II, when there was a very strong middle class and people's standards of living were going up, at least in this country. It increased wealth for everybody. It made the country stronger. This is basically weakening our country. It has us fighting among ourselves. I mean, like you had said before about that letter to Iran. I mean, what insanity to tell a foreign government who has their own agenda. I don't trust them any more than I think anybody should. Right. And we're saying to them that we can't even speak with one voice when we come to speak with you. So come and divide us more.
Yeah, exactly. And that's not exactly the correct protocol to be doing. and writing one of those letters and going around. Anyway, we don't need to get sidelined on that one.
Well,
but,
it certainly is not patriotic.
No, it's not.
That'd be like cutting
it's
a
not
deal
in the
with...
best interests of any of us.
Right, it's like trying to cut a deal with Hitler, rather than stand up to him.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But, in the old days, John, I think people used to be able to have jobs, and they knew they had the job security. And along with job security came pensions, right? But now we're sitting here on a pension time bomb.
Well, I'm in New Jersey, and I have a pension from the government, and let me tell you, it does make one ponder, what you've done for the last 25 or 30 years of your life, because you've been the one paying the money in. And then, the government, which enforces the laws of requiring the employers to uphold their end of a deal, is reneging on its part of the deal. The money has always come in from the workers. It just hasn't come in from the government.
Yeah, and I understand there in New Jersey, your government your governor ran up the state's debts by cutting taxes for the wealthy, and now he's planning on taking the money from the pension funds of workers in the public sector to cover those debts.
Well, this governor, you know how I feel about him. I've worked off and on for 3 or 4 governors, and this person has the least amount of dignity of anybody I've ever seen in my life. I can't imagine that, he has really disgraced the office of governor. I can't view it any other way. And it's not like New Jersey is broke. We have a budget of $34 billion a year. There's plenty of money going in. It's a matter of making the choices and, stepping up to the plate and fixing whatever problem it is. As much as he passed a law that the amount that the workers have to put in is constitutional, but the amount he has to put in on behalf of the government is unconstitutional. He's a governor, he's a lawyer, he's a former U.S. attorney. I mean, I'm just kind of dumbfounded, that's even some kind of excuse. And when you look deeper, the amount of money that for, the people he's had out of Wall Street who are, managing the pension funds, which have, $70 billion or something within them. It's cost like $1.5 billion in the last couple of years for them to manage the money, and it hasn't even kept up with, the Standard & Poor's, normal rate of return, much less not worth almost $2 billion worth of services.
Wow, you mentioned Wall Street. There's another one. We've been duped all the way around on that one as well, and our 401ks versus pension. Talk about that a little.
Well, the whole 401k thing came about because they were trying to give additional, rewards to CEOs back in the 80s. It was just another device to allow them to avoid some taxes on very super high incomes. How it became the main retirement fund for general people is absolutely, again, insane. People can't keep up with what goes on with Wall Street. And then once you put your money in these 401k accounts, the money is pretty much held hostage, that you can't get the money out. How many people in the country has any idea of how to deal with the Wall Street game? I hear all the time about investment advice and all of these other kinds of things. It's a specialty that normal people don't have. And then you get to the whole idea that our economy is based on what's going on in Wall Street. That was certainly never the intention in the formation of this country, ever. They wanted nothing to do with that kind of operation.
Yeah, exactly. And with Wall Street, as you say, John, it's stacked against us again. They get us to invest our monies in this, and then we're at their mercy. Because as you said, they've got their own gang, their own inside group. They know the rules, they know how it works, and we have to pay them yet more money to take care of our money. But in the end, they're just working for themselves, to make more money for themselves, one, off of our money, and two, by charging us all these commissions and stuff. It's ridiculous.
And the sad thing about how that's all happened is that somehow there's been a transference from what had been a very strong manufacturing base that had been in this country with companies that were doing well and whatever, and you put money into stock for all of that. But now all of that has changed almost in the shell game to now where we're playing with the paper, with stocks, bonds about these companies, when you don't even know that anything the company puts out in terms of information about its financials is actually accurate. And who's enforcing it? The SEC is understaffed. Obviously, they couldn't handle the Great Recession piece. How are they ever going to handle this?
Yeah, exactly. And you're talking about being able to read all the fine print. I mean, there's the insanity of more and more contracts, no matter what you do. Even to pay a bill online, you have to agree to these goofy little terms of agreement that run pages of tiny fine print. It's nuts. It's all nuts.
Yes. And then there's these industries that pop up that add additional fees for when you do something online. We have that with our motor vehicle renewals. If you get your registration renewed online, it's much more convenient and whatever, but there's like a $2 surcharge that somebody somewhere is getting for operating the equipment. It's like, why isn't that free?
Yeah, exactly. This should be saving money because it's easier for us to go online. They wouldn't have to staff as many people. We have the same thing here in Colorado as of a couple of years ago because I do it online too. It's a lot easier, but nope, got to pay that extra $2 fee. All right, stay with us. America Now continues. All right, everybody, welcome back. You're listening to America Now. John Higgins and I discussing American Crazy tonight here on America Now. And, John, you know, you were talking about having to pay those fees, and we've got them here on the licenses. A friend of mine the other day mentioned a bank. That banks are now charging, at least her bank, is now charging to deposit your check in their bank. It's like it's not enough they use your money. Now they're going to charge you so they can use your money. Oh, my goodness. This is not, the bankers are just going nuts anymore. They always probably have been. But, now they're also threatening not to fund certain candidates. I think you know about this one.
Oh, no, absolutely. Because Elizabeth Warren has been going after them for, all of their financial practices about how they've harmed consumers. So they've decided that they were not going to provide money to Democratic, senators or whatever. I think in some ways it's a great thing because that might be the bullet that brings it to a head. I mean, the whole idea is why would banks be contributing money to any campaign to begin with?
Right.
I really do believe with the Founding Fathers is that there shouldn't have been any kind of corporate donations, certainly nothing from a bank. They're regulated by the government. To pump money in to the people who are going to regulate you only reeks of some form of collusion or potential corruption.
Yeah, and then on top of it, they're gambling and securities and all this kind of stuff. Come on, this is.
But they've got the best deal in town. It would be like you go down to the casino and then you gamble the money, and then if you get all the money, you get more money, right? But now, if you gamble the money and you lose all your money, which is really what the recession was in 2008, well, somebody's got to bail me out now.
Yeah.
Right? And you still have to give me a bonus because, I was here.
Oh, yeah. Well, we know all too well. And again, I think that's what's happened. We've seen this extremism, and it's been put right in front of us where the government is. The government is supposed to be protecting us and working for us. However, they're protecting those who are basically robbing us blind right now. And everybody's going, wait a minute. But so many people, John, are giving up and just saying, I don't know what to do. They're so afraid. They figure, well, there's nothing we can do. Even my vote may not count.
Well, the thing of it is your vote always does count. And that's the one thing they ultimately can't control. And I think that we need to start looking for, people who are really talking about the right stuff. And I think some of those are emerging on the scene. I see stuff by, Robert Reich and Sanders and, Warren that really seems to be on the money about, doing the stuff that's going to help everyone in the country. I know that when you and I talk a lot of times, we keep talking about the wealthy as though they're the enemy. I don't really consider them the enemy. What I consider is that we need to share in all of it. And in doing that, it makes everybody's life better. You keep separating this like this, and no good comes of it. And you have all this money sitting into a small group of people who are using it to manipulate the government. What will happen is the government no longer functions. And when the government no longer functions, the rest of society will get rid of the government.
Well, it's almost like we're allowing a ruling class to be put in place. When you think about it, we're allowing these people at the top to continue to do what they're doing, as well as, look at Hollywood. They're out there parading down their red carpets, spending, $50,000 on a purse or whatever instead. And not everybody's that way. I'm generalizing right now. But, it's to the point where it's just ludicrous. It truly is a mad, 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 mad world. And that's what's being portrayed to us. It's what we see. And we're accepting it.
Right. Well, society, Hollywood is not real life. And people have to, maybe that's part of the problem with the television generation and motion pictures and that sort of thing. What happens on the movie screen is not what really happens. So, to me, that's like an industry that makes money. I don't hear of them really corrupting, politicians or whatever. Some of them appear with some of them, but when one of the Hollywood stars makes some kind of opinion about what's going on politically or in the world, to me, you're an actor on the stage. I don't know that you know anything more than anybody else. But, that to me is just like a sideline. What we need to do is really start focusing on the real people that are really trying to change society and try to back them. And I know that's hard, but, we've got to start somewhere.
Yeah, people who are talking fundamental fairness for everyone and equality and replace the chaos with harmony, where we start working together again. This crazy division and finger pointing. Now, you and I have talked about this plenty. This has to end. This is where we need to be united. We need to stand together and work together for the greater good of all. All, meaning everybody, not just a select group.
Right. And that message, when the people who are saying that, then they're called socialists or whatever, which is insane to me. So, to me, always listen to the source of who's telling you what. If they're really talking about trying to harm somebody else, or they're mean-spirited about, the people who are really trying something. This whole idea of being an obstructionist in government, there's a whole pot of them in Congress that shouldn't be there. They should be fired because they're not doing their jobs. They can't pass a budget. They keep repealing, they want to repeal Obamacare to the nth degree. If there's problems with it, fix the problem. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Right. Yeah, I agree. And we keep, as you say, between Obamacare and abortion. That was settled a long, long time ago. And it still just keeps coming up, like pit bulls with a bone. They're just hanging on to it. We need to have accountability and responsibility again in this country. And again, corporations can be a wonderful thing. However, as you say, the founding fathers probably would be rolling in their graves if they saw, what's going on right now, especially with the multinational corporations and the refusals to pay taxes.
Oh, absolutely. And the founding fathers didn't want to be controlled by anybody. And the corporations, as time goes on, you and I have discussed that as well, is that it's being owned by a smaller group. That one company owns another company, so that you've got this pot of structures, some of them that have budgets probably bigger than the governments of many of the countries in the world, that are exercising all kinds of control and influence in ways that are not for the common good. They are for their personal good. And that has never been what the intent of the United States was.
Yeah, and I think on top of everything else, too, we're talking about enforcing laws against corporate fraud. And, we've talked about taking the money out of the political campaigns and those types of things. I think, too, we really need to hold the media accountable.
Oh, absolutely. But they are squirming little devils. I mean, you can make up fibs, you know. I mean, you got, you know, Bill O'Reilly, who, well, I don't know, I was in a war zone, and you got Brian Williams, who was, you know, shot down in a helicopter. I mean, I mean, no offense to those people. You know, if you want to write fiction and write books, that's fine. But you shouldn't be newscasters.
Yeah, we need to restore integrity again. Bottom line, you know, we have to start somewhere. And it seems like in this society, since we are so, you know, based on the visual, you know, being online and getting our news on the internet and TV and all of that, since we are so focused that way, maybe that's where we need to really concentrate and begin with. And radio, you know, through the media, we can start changing this and start turning this country back around.
Right, but, you know, the real problem has been is, you know, we have, you know, networks that are basically saying that they're fair and balanced when they're nothing but not.
Right, not.
You know, I learned under the Nixon era that whatever they were saying, turn it 180 degrees and look, because a lot of times that's where the smoke screen is, and if they're telling you something, it's usually what's their real agenda.
Yeah, exactly. Well, John, unfortunately, we're running out of time here. Thanks so much, as always, for joining me. I appreciate it. And again, everybody, join us here again next week for another round of Practical Solutions for America. And join us on our Facebook page. Come on, we want to hear from you. We've got to get the talk. We've got to get it going.